book at the moment.
Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Is it like a short story? Is it like bigger?
Yeah, it's going to be like a novel length.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I do not know how many people are going to show up, you know? So I'm trying to figure out, do I start the discussion now or do I wait until people come in?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if they're doing recordings, so maybe even if people don't show up for the live thing, they can still see the talk.
Well, I'm currently recording it right now. So I'll upload that to Facebook once we're done. So I guess if you have any questions to start off, we can do that, or I can just make something up as an introduction. Because I don't know what Sean was planning, so we're just gonna do this my way, which is
Okay.
I don't have a plan. We're just gonna talk about stuff we like.
That sounds perfect.
All right. So do you have any questions up front?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess kind of what I've mostly heard about visceral beginnings from people is kind of how it is a good way to sort of pull the reader into the experience of the character. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're thinking, or?
Yeah. So Visceral is kind of my jam. I am all about imagery. I'm all about really capturing whatever emotion needs to be captured in the scene that's happening. With beginnings, I go pretty dark and pretty graphic, but that's me personally because I'm super into dark stuff. Usually visceral means like great detail graphic. Usually people think gory, but personally I think it can mean just any emotion that is shown in great detail in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely falls under the category of show, don't tell, because if you can be told he was afraid, or you can talk about how he was shaking and he had goosebumps and he was sweating and his heart was racing and thumping in his ears. The more detail you give to what's happening emotionally and physically to the character, the more we already know that he's scared. You don't have to tell us he was scared.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what visceral, I think, means, and it's super good in every aspect of the story, but it's the most important in the beginning of the story. Mostly because a lot of readers, including myself, usually read maybe a page or two before they decide if they want to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't completely sink your claws into them on those first 2 pages, you're probably not going to keep them. So it's really important to kind of get that out there in the most gripping way you possibly can. So there's a couple of, I want to say, elements, techniques, I'll say techniques. There's a couple of techniques you could use to have a visceral beginning. I personally like something called in medias res, which means starting in the middle of a scene. So you just jump in right at the middle. You don't know what's going on, but you're thrown into the action, you're thrown into whatever is happening, and it has a sense of mystery, and as you go along, you kind of piece together what had happened before then. Oh, there's so many examples, but I gotta think of some examples now because we're winging this. All right. Let's see. Let's go Troll Hunters. You familiar with that show?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I love that show. But so an example of in medias res can be found in Troll Hunters, where we open up with 2 trolls fighting to the death. We don't know who they are. We can kind of guess who's the bad guy and who's the good guy based on their color schemes for their rocky skin. But ultimately, we don't know why they're fighting. We don't know who they are. We don't know how they got to start fighting. But the minute that screen pulls up, they're fighting. We're in this fight scene suddenly. And it's a really powerful technique to just jump in the middle like that. Again, it is a style though. I know there are some readers and writers who do not prefer to jump in the middle. They like to start at the beginning. I am not one of those people. I like starting in the middle of things because I just like the adventurous excitement of it. So I like sorry, it's my toddler. I like the hunt of the mystery, to figure out what's going on and what happened. So I guess murder mysteries are a good example too of this.
Mhm.
You know, you know, a person was murdered, or maybe you see them being murdered. Maybe you don't see who, maybe you don't see how, but that's the foundation of the story to come. So whatever beginning you're bringing to them, it's got to be that hook that promises the foundation of the rest of the story. I can see you now.
Oh,
Hello.
there.
But yeah, so I'm a huge fan of in medias res, and it's a very good way to start off in a very visceral manner.
So here's a question, because I'm like you. I really like that feeling of kind of you're kind of thrown right in, and you sort of have to figure out a little bit what's going on, because it kind of, I don't know, makes me feel like a more active participant, you know, instead of just having everything kind of handed to you.
Yes.
Do you think that there is kind of a balance that you have to, because I've had people read things of mine and other people's work where they get confused more quickly, and maybe they're just not as able to kind of figure out what's going on, or they just don't want to work as hard or something.
Yes,
But
there is actually. If you take any creative writing courses, they will teach you that there is this little rainbow, let's call it, like a speedometer, a little radar, so that one half represents Gesundheit. It's my husband. One side represents how much the writer needs to work to pull the reader in, to make them understand what's happening. The other half is how much the reader needs to work to understand what's happening. So if you tip it one way, the writer is working too hard and giving too much information to the reader, and the reader can often feel stupid for it, or feel like they're being pandered to, or feel like they're being patronized. No one likes to feel like they're being patronized or that someone thinks they're an idiot. Like, obviously, we know that he's angry because he's shaking with fury. We already know he's angry. You don't have to say that. We get it. But on the other hand, if the writer doesn't put their half in, then the reader is working too hard to get what they want, and that can be frustrating because it makes a lot of confusion, and people don't know what's going on. They have to really extend their imagination to get that image in their head of what's happening, which means that you don't want to go one way or the other. You want that happy medium that you were talking about, but it can be a little bit difficult to figure out how to do, especially in fantasy. I say this with experience, because fantasy, whole different world, whole different rules system. There's magic. Physics doesn't work the same way. There are words that mean totally different things. There are objects that don't exist in this world. It can be very confusing if you do not give the proper I guess, description of what's going on. But at the same time, you don't really want to over-describe these days. Back in the 50s, it was kind of standard practice to explain literally everything up front in the first 100 pages. Everything about the world, everything about magic, everything about the history was told in those first 50 to 100 pages up front, all at once. Me personally, I hate those beginnings because I can't remember any of the information. I don't remember any of it. And as you go along, typically they wouldn't give you a reminder of those as you went along because you were just told through exposition rather than learning about it on your own, figuring it out. Therefore, it became just part of your long-term memory instead of short-term memory. And I think that's really the key, is figuring out how to get people to work for it enough so that they actually remember it because it's in their long-term memory, instead of just trying to do flashcards all the time. A good way I prefer to do that is to only give out the information on the world itself, or something about a character's past, or an item explanation, is when it becomes relevant to the story. Mm-hmm. So if a character is walking along, they see a shiny rock, and they pick up the shiny rock, and they go, oh, I know what this is. This is a such and such stone. And then give like a 2-3 sentence description of what this such and such stone means and what it can do. And then you show the character using that stone how it's supposed to be, which is another example of showing don't tell. But in this instance, you probably do have to give an explanation, because otherwise your readers aren't going to understand what they are being shown. And if you need them to understand it, you just have to do what's necessary, because flowery prose are beautiful, but no one's going to care if they don't understand what they're reading. So clarity over prettiness is usually the rule. Mm-hmm. Which is super hard to do with fantasy sometimes, but it's a beast we all have to battle.
That seems very true about fantasy, just having, since you can't assume that people know all the detail, you know, like what mm-hmm. a certain monster is or an animal or something. Do you think that, because it seems to me like people who read fantasy are maybe a little bit more open to being unsure about that kind of thing compared to someone who reads more just like mainstream fiction?
I have noticed that it's a good mix of both. You will never find two fantasy readers, well, maybe you will, but it's a 50-50 split in the fantasy world and the mainstream fiction world. Sometimes you will just get half the people wanting the info about the world up front. Sometimes you just want the people who want the plot. And I actually ran into this when I first finished the rough draft of my first book and I was looking for an agent, and I went into a conference, a writing conference down here in Atlanta, and you get like a critique session with 2 agents. So you give them your pitch, and they critique your pitch based off of that. Well, the 2 agents that I was, getting critiqued by, I gave them my pitch, and I kind of had a really awkward moment with them because they started fighting to each other about which way was correct. Because you had one agent just really, really intensely say, no, they have to give all the information about the world up front. And the other one was super intense about, no, they have to tell you about the plot first. I don't care about the world until I know about the plot. So that's kind of how I learned it does not matter. You just got to do whichever one you prefer, and you're going to find people who are in the same mindset. So, and like I see it everywhere too. You just got different preferences. Everyone's got a different favorite flavor of ice cream. And I hate chocolate, but a lot of people like chocolate. And I love strawberry, and apparently a lot of people hate strawberry. I don't know. Yeah. But back to the visceral nature of this topic, because I can totally keep on topic, y'all. Anyway, so another point to try and keep visceral imagery. I don't know if you've ever heard of something called aphantasia. Okay, Cool. I love explaining this because I learned about it recently and it's really fascinating. Aphantasia is the inability to imagine pictures in your head. So let's say, for instance, you close your eyes and you imagine an apple. But when you imagine this apple, do you actually see an apple? Because people with aphantasia, it's just blackness. They don't see anything. They understand the concept behind it, but they don't see the image in their minds. So there's the opposite of hyperphantasia, which means you see everything and every graphic detail you can about this apple. Is it on a branch? Is it hanging off of a stem? Is it on the ground? Is it rotted? Is it decayed? What color is it? Does it have dewdrops on it? Is it bitten into? Is there a worm in it? Is there a leaf on it? Is it on a table? All of these things we just kind of know already. We see the picture. And so for those who have aphantasia, they don't see anything, but they understand the concepts. So there's an advantage and disadvantage to having both of these things. If you're one or the other, you can still be fantastic creators if you have either one. The difficulty is knowing how to tackle these and make sure that you're giving that visceral detail that you need out of what you're seeing or not seeing. So for people with aphantasia, the disadvantage is you don't really see all that detail, and you have to think about every tiny thing one by one in little bite-sized thing. Maybe you have a list of all the possibilities. Maybe you look online for inspiration to see this thing, and then make a list of all the elements to include. But the advantage of that is you can pick and choose which is the most important. Which of these descriptions have the most punch to it, and which words have the most punch to match that image. Let me think of an example for a sentence. Okay, let's say that you've got a guy with a sword, and you walk up and he slashes a dude. Okay, where does he slash the dude? Is it in his chest? On his shoulder? Did he slash his neck? Did he get sliced in the face? Does he have a scar now? And now we get into the question of how did it feel? How did it feel for that sword to be in the hands of this character as it slid into the rib cage, into the muscle? Did it have a vibration? Did it have a squelching noise? Just thinking about those details can really literally dig into what's happening and really make the reader feel like they are engaging with the characters as the characters experience it. So that's the advantage of having aphantasia and being a creator, if you can learn how to organize very efficiently. Hyperphantasia is much more chaotic because, sorry, my earphones fell out. Anyway, so because we see every detail, everything. We see, we hear, we smell, we taste, and we touch everything. We feel everything. Therefore, it's really hard to figure out what is not important to the story, what's not important to the character experience, to the reader experience. So usually what I do, I write everything and then I cut 80% of it because I don't know what's important and what's not important until I have everything there on the page and I can pick and choose, okay, this is what I want. This has the punch I'm looking for. This is kind of just extra stuff that doesn't need to be there, so it's gone. Delete it. So those are two approaches that I know of. Everyone's got their own approach, honestly, but I guess my takeaway from that is the punchier, the better. Because I don't know, I read a lot of fiction that has a lot of MLA vocab words, you know, and SAT words, things that are just so fancy and grandiloquent. I love that word because it's so hypocritical. But yeah, so you got all these grandiloquent words that are super fancy and they're so intellectual, and it makes you feel like a real writer. But honestly, to me, I don't prefer that. I don't care if you use the silliest childish word there is. If it gives me the feeling that I'm looking for in what I'm reading, then it was the right word to use for me. Again, the jury is split on that. You're going to find people who hate that. You're going to have people who like it. So you choose for yourself what you want to do. But me personally, it's much more visceral if we have the punchier words over the fancy words. Because for me, you can have the most eloquent story there is, but if I get bored reading what you're showing me, I'm not going to read it. So to me, I would find a different book.
Makes a lot of sense. Let me ask, you were talking about the hyperphagia and the other one, what was it again?
Aphantasia.
Aphantasia.
I'm going to write that down in the chat here so you can see it.
Do you think that, just wondering, like, because if your readers are going to have, some of your readers are going to have one or the other of those. So do you ever think about, I guess, like, what is the right amount of detail so that someone with aphantasia can still get the detail they need and someone with hyperphantasia doesn't get too much, or is it vice versa?
Beta readers.
Do it too much, you think? Yeah.
Nope, you are not digging into this too much. That is the most important thing ever for a writer. We can edit our stuff hundreds of times over, but we will still miss things because our brains are already expecting a certain word to appear or a certain image to show up as we're rereading our own stuff because we know what's coming up. So if we have a typo, or if we're missing a word entirely, or if there's not enough detail, we won't notice it because our brain is already filling in those gaps because we know what's coming. So having that external feedback is the most important thing to a writer's work, because we need to know what is confusing, what is not engaging you, where is the disconnect, and where does it connect the best. We need to know these things. Therefore, I would say find your beta readers, find your proofreaders, and make sure you have a variety of the types of readers that you get. If you have people who prefer the other way, I don't know, like if you prefer people having too much explanation and then you have people who prefer having not enough information, it's good to have both, because if they both say, I like it, then you're onto something. It's that happy medium gray area.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Do you have any more questions? Because I don't see anyone else up here that I can see.
I guess, yeah, in terms of kind of a visceral writing, I've mostly thought of it, or maybe I just have heard of other people talk about it in terms of kind of sensory details, but it sounds like you're also kind of including emotional, kind of more inner life stuff too. Do you consider all that to be part of visceral writing, and is there one way that you kind of prefer, or that kind of maybe just depends on what the scene is focusing on? Does that question make sense?
Yes, it absolutely is considered under that category of visceral, because visceral is just in so much detail that it feels real to us. So, let's see. So emotions, the emotion scenes that you want to include can also parallel with the physical actions and the sensories that you're talking about. But there definitely is a time and a place for everything, as Professor Oak always said in the old games. So you kind of have to use your judgment, you know, and your preference for how you feel it should be in. Should the emotion aspect of it be in there over the physical stuff? Should they both be in there? Should it just be the physical stuff? That's up for you to decide with each and every scene. Sorry, my toddler is playing. I don't know if you can hear her.
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, I mean, to me, the emotional aspect of it is very much a sensory, just as much as the rest of it. I guess that's why they call it a sixth sense. I could be totally wrong about that. Don't take my word on that, please. but yeah, emotions are part of being human. So to not include them, you will not have that connection you're looking for in your readers. It's just going to be very robotic without that in there. So I do sometimes have to go back in with my other edits to cut out some of the emotion explanations in there, because it does get super over dramatic, you know, and you want to make sure that it's not over dramatic to the point of silliness, but you want it to feel real. Because and it sounds weird coming from a fantasy author, I guess, making something feel real to a reader, to relate to a fantasy character that doesn't exist, where the whole world and the magic and the physics don't really exist. But you gotta find those ways to really connect to them, and that can be pretty difficult sometimes, especially if you are staring at your screen for thousands of hours at a time, forgetting to sleep. And if you don't sleep, you kind of get pretty loopy, and you're like, oh, this stuff is great, yeah. And then you read it the next day, and you're like, oh god, this is crap. So yeah, I guess my takeaway for that is to just up to you, your preference. Just follow your heart. If you're snoring while reading it, change it immediately. Let's see, is there anything else to talk about? We are halfway through. This is me not having an outline.
I bet there are a lot of people, it was confusing to figure out how to get into the Zoom meeting. So there's probably people who are trying to figure out how to get inside.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anyone else asking for access right now. So yeah. Okay. I don't know. I guess we'll just continue on. Let me think of some other subject to talk about. So we've got Visceral Beginnings. Talk about that. Talk about that. I guess I should get some more examples about Visceral Beginnings, because we got 30 minutes, and why not? It is hard for me to think about that with a children's show playing in front, because that's absolutely not visceral whatsoever. It's really weird it's really weird when you're writing about someone literally slaughtering people, while you've got a toddler behind you singing along to a nursery rhyme.
I can see how that would feel a little weird.
Yeah, it's a little weird. Well, do you have any examples of what you've seen or read of what you think could be a visceral beginning?
Let me think here. Let me see, where would I look at?
I think Daredevil might be a really good example. The show?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think first episode of Daredevil, dude, guy gets punched in the face immediately. And yeah. Ooh, I know one. Okay, so, this is actually how I found my favorite author. My favorite prose author, because I love his writing style. A couple years ago, I was browsing Barnes & Noble before the whole COVID thing shut everything down. And I was having a bit of a crisis with me being a reader, saying, why am I not enjoying anything I read anymore? Why does everything bore me? I thought maybe I just wasn't a reader anymore, which was really disorienting for me, who's read a lot of things in the past and really enjoyed things, but I couldn't find anything new that I really liked. So I went to Barnes & Noble and I just picked every single book off the shelf and read the first couple paragraphs, read the first couple paragraphs. They all started the exact same, because I basically just read fantasy and science fiction. That's what I prefer. And majority of like everything I picked up, I must have picked up like 50 books in a row. Pretty much all the same stuff for the first 2 paragraphs. Scenery description, world description, scenery description, world description, scenery description, history description, history description, history description, history description. And we're talking like thousands of years of history descriptions in like 10 pages. Every single one kept starting the same way. So I finally picked one up, and it's a dude being tortured. We don't know why he's being tortured, but he's being tortured, and it was the only thing that was different in that beginning for that genre that I could find out of 50-something books. And it was finally like that pace. I was like, yep, I'm getting this book, just because it opened with something exciting, and that's what I was looking for. And I bought it, I read it, and I got the next book because it's so like it was like that the entire way through. And that's honestly, hi sweetie, that's honestly what the beginnings of the books I think should really be about, which is personally why I like prologues, because in fantasy I feel like a prologue is the foundation of the story itself. It really is that promise that this is what you're going to read in the rest of it. Please pick it up and read the rest. And unfortunately, a lot of times I do really like a prologue of one book, but then as I keep reading, it's never like that again. They only focused a lot on that beginning and just kind of did something completely different, as if the prologue or the first chapter was literally just a gimmick or a hook, and it didn't deliver what I was promised, so I put it down. So I think that definitely is a promise of saying what this book is. This is the type of stuff you will find. If you don't like what you find here, you may as well put it down now. Because, I mean, let's face it, how many people are into horror? Quite a few. But maybe you're not into horror, and you pick up a book and you read the first couple paragraphs that has a lot of gore in it, and you're like, I don't think this is the book for me. You're probably right. Because if you don't like horror, you shouldn't read horror if you're not going to enjoy it. You know, it just goes back to the preference thing. The promise you have might not be for everyone, but it's still a promise. So you just don't want to break that, I feel like. Because I'm always so frustrated whenever it's an awesome prologue that I liked, but I didn't like the rest of it because it wasn't like the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also had some where I pushed through that beginning that was so slow and so boring, but the rest of it was fantastic. So you're not always going to get people who push through the beginning, which is why it's important to focus on the beginning the most. But it doesn't mean you should neglect the rest of it. But you still get people who do that. I don't know.
I feel like I hear people talk about the beginnings and how you have to hook the reader, and clearly it's important. But I think it seems like you could, if you took it the wrong way, you could almost think of it as like, oh, I need to come up with this really crazy beginning that is going to hook the reader, almost like it's a trick, you know, like you're pulling the person into your book without having it actually fit the whole, you know, fit the rest of the book and work for the story overall.
And that's how it comes across when I read something and I was promised so much on that first beginning chapter, And I didn't get that. And I just felt like I was lied to. And it's just not a good idea to do. What was it? This is okay, so I have an example of this that I have experience with, but like, I don't want to say that I disliked the book. I actually really liked this book. It's called The Warded Man.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked this book, but I wasn't expecting the story I got. So I have like conflicting emotions about it because the title is The Warded Man. And we follow a child and then like a 12-year-old adolescent. And then the last 50 pages, maybe he's a man. Now he's the warded man, the last 50 pages. So technically, I really like this story, but I feel like it should have been an origin story, or it really was an origin story. Something about the title and the fact that we had a man on the cover really made me feel like it was gonna be all about him as an adult. But we got the origin story, which was still really amazing. But I don't know, I was just so like, why didn't we get the actual, like the whole thing type of expectation, I guess. This just goes into how marketing can really be about expectation setting, which does go into the Visceral beginnings in general, because it's also an expectation setter. Like the Twilight books, okay? I was 16 when I read those, so it was totally for me. I read the little back blurb, which promised me a romance with a vampire and a human. It didn't promise me anything else. So that first book was exactly what I was promised, and I was satisfied because I knew what to expect. The rest of the series I'm a little bit iffy about because they tried to make it seem like this whole epic thing, and it really wasn't that epic. It was just kind of more of the first book, but they promised me something more. So my expectation had changed, and they did not fit it for me personally. Maybe they fit it for other people, but not me. But yeah, so that the beginnings are just so important. I mean, you don't want to neglect or forget about the other stuff, but it's so hard to get people to keep reading if you don't grab them immediately.
You know, I also read The Warded Man not that long ago, and I don't think I thought about it at the time, but that makes a lot of sense. I mean, he was a kid, and I guess I
Yeah,
was expecting him to become the warded. Like I was like, okay, so this is him as a kid. Once
right.
I figured out he was the main character, but it took a lot. I
It was
was
really a
expecting
long
it
time.
to go faster. Yeah.
Yeah, I was expecting him to become the warded man by at least the second half of the book. It didn't happen. Now, what happened was really cool. Like I said, it was a really good book, but it just wasn't what I was expecting, so I was really conflicted about it.
That's interesting. Yeah. It's like
Hmm.
you have to you have to make a promise the person. It's like you have to fulfill your promise, but then you have to make the promise in the first place be something that is going to make the person be interested enough to start reading.
Yeah. Ooh, I just thought of another example for visceral writing and visceral beginnings in general. Okay. Eric Nyland's The Mortal Coils.
Mm-hmm.
I freaking love that series. It's so good, and it does a really great job of being visceral, emotionally and physically in detail. Like, you really feel for these characters when they're going through some kind of stressful, traumatic experience. You feel like you're going through it too. He does a really great job of that.
Hmm. Oh, you know, something I started reading, I haven't even finished it yet, but it's Middle Game by Sean and McGuire.
New one
Just
for me.
the very first part was very visceral. It was a guy, his sister is dying, and she's some kind of magic or robot or something. You can't even really tell like at the beginning, but you can his like a emotion and kind of guilt and regret and things come through very strongly. So even though you don't like you don't have a good sense for like what the room looks like, or, you know, you don't have all the details, but you've still got that kind of, you know, you can feel what he's feeling very strongly. And I think that, at least for me, it's enough to hook you into staying long enough to, you know, long enough to figure out those details and stuff later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always the best way to go with things. So I feel, at least. How to Train Your Dragon is another one. It's my favorite franchise ever.
Mm-hmm.
The books don't start off very visceral because they're for children. I get that. But, like, dude, those movies, those movies can be visceral without showing much gore, which is very interesting. Also, the power of suggestion really thrives in writing just as much as it does cinematography. So if you think about Psycho, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Think about Psycho. The art of Psycho, the actual horror aspect of it that really gripped people was the fact that they didn't actually show the gore happening. They just suggested it. So the implication of something awful happening just was incredibly frightening. All they had to do was just snip out the actual thing and just show some blood squirting on a wall. It seems so simple, but it had a super powerful effect because people's imaginations like just go crazy if they don't actually see what's going on. It's part of why I have to watch my doctors draw blood. I have to watch that needle go in. I can't not see it, otherwise it's more painful when it happens. I have to see it happening so I know exactly what I'm dealing with and when, so that my imagination doesn't just go off the charts being like, it's the most painful thing ever.
Maybe I'll have to try that strategy next time.
If he can stomach it. My husband is afraid of needles, so he can't look. So, yeah, to each their own. Let's see, we have 10 minutes. I don't know where her sippy is. I don't know. Okay. This is so weird doing this from home. There's just so many distractions.
You know, I work from home anyway, so I'm kind of used to it. But I've noticed like there are way more people in like work meetings and any kind of call where there's just way more normal for people's like kids to run into the room or something like that, you know?
Yeah. And my husband has like 24/7 meetings every time he's at work. So the
You have to take over because I need to get that phone call.
I'll do it in 10 minutes. So I've got 10 minutes. I don't know what to say. I have to work too. The few times I actually have something to do work-wise is talking. He's still in meetings, and like it's really hard to balance that because we live in a tiny apartment and we're just like, I don't know, 10 feet away. So our conferences keep blurring together, plus the toddler. Like she's got her show on, so she's kind of distracted. She's got her toys, so there's that. But like it's been really weird trying to adjust.
Ellie, you don't have to keep talking for another 10 minutes. You've got the world building panel coming up next.
Yeah.
If you guys are done, that's fine.
Okay.
You did a great job. Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting me do this. I really love this subject.
Good. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I should refill my coffee while I'm at it.
And thank you for joining also.
Yeah, thanks so much for being my springboard.
Of course. Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna head over to the next one pretty soon. Bye.
Bye.
See you in a minute, Ellie.
All right.